Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. FODI started in 2009 and is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival. FODI exists to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. A.C. Grayling says, "To read is to fly." The distinguished philosopher who has dedicated his life to examining knowledge believes we need a revolution in education. But many of us grapple with the question, what is education for? And is this even the right question to ask? Please enjoy the 2015 FODI session, Bad Education, with A.C. Grayling.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, indeed, so my theme is education. And of course, education is a vast subject. There are so many different things to say about it. Those of you who in the audience who are educators will know that there are so many theories about how we should teach, about how people learn. There are so many different views about what the curriculum should contain. So many views, indeed, about who should be offered education, who should be educated. At the moment, of course, what we do is we take kids from about the age of 5 or 6 and we put them through a process that they emerge from at the age of maybe 18 or maybe 21 or 22 if they've gone on to higher education. And we hope that when they come out at the other end, they will be what we hope that an education will make people be. And the great question that we have to address is whether the answer that we give to the question what education is for, and I do, by the way, Julia, think that is the right question, what is education for? That the answer that we give to that one is, in my view now, the wrong answer. And that's what I want to try and explain. And I want to say something about what I think the right answer might be. But it has always been the case, right the way through the history of our civilization, and indeed of all civilizations really, that to equip people for a full part in the lives of our societies, we have to provide them with an opportunity to be equipped to understand the nature of the world around them, to be able to manipulate the tools that are so essential in our world, of course, the tools of literacy and numeracy. And there have also been people, philosophers of education, educators themselves, who have thought that the future of the world, its peace, its health, very much depends upon education. And there can't be any question but that they're right. In our contemporary world, what really does matter is that more girls should get an opportunity for education. It's a very surprising and dismaying statistic to realize that there are many parts of the world, and the Middle East is one of them, where literacy among women is only about 50%. And if you think of what that means, mothers who can't read, bringing up children, who can't therefore participate in the society around them as effectively as they might do. If you think of the impact of illiteracy and innumeracy, you see how serious it is. Many years ago, I was doing some work at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and the UN had just published a report on the effect of education on women in Africa. And the report said that just a degree of elementary education, the ability to read and write, add and subtract, utterly transformed the lives of many of these women. They had fewer children, the children were healthier, the women could look after their own money, they ceased automatically to be the possession of their fathers, passed on to become the possession of a husband or husbands. And the transformative effect, therefore, of this enormously empowering thing, which is to have those basic skills of literacy and numeracy, was really astonishing. It gave me a desire, really, to be involved in some way in enhancing the education of women in Africa. And so I wanted to help to set up a school for girls. But I was advised by no less a person than Ayaan Hirsi Ali, whose name you may very well know, that it would be wrong to have a school just for girls, that it had to be co-educational, because otherwise the boys and men in that community would be hostile to the girls who were being privileged in that way. But she said to me, the key thing to ensure that girls get an education in Africa, absolutely fundamental thing, is that there must be a loo with a door. It's got to be a lavatory with a door. Because if there isn't, then when the girls reach puberty, they can't go to school, or their school is very badly interrupted because they can't look after their personal hygiene. And it's a little thing like that, off to left field, a surprising thing that one wouldn't normally think about when thinking about setting up a school, that would make all the difference. So there are lots and lots and lots of different considerations that one has to adduce to think about education across the great range of questions that education involves. But the importance of education to society and to its future is, as I say, undeniable. After the First World War, three of the most significant philosophers of the 20th century in the Western tradition anyway, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Karl Popper, all of them got involved in education. They all thought that in order to avoid war in the future, in order to try to heal the wounds that had been created by the First World War, the next generations of people really needed to be given a proper opportunity for an education. Bertrand Russell founded a school, Telegraph House School, which became rather notorious because of his views about things. He, as you know, was an atheist, and he believed in rationalism, wanted to bring children up to be rational thinkers. And the story is told that a bishop visited the school one day, rang the doorbell, and the door was opened by a naked child. And the bishop said, "Good God," and the child said, "There isn't one." It just shows you how successful Bertrand Russell was. Karl Popper was a teacher of science, and the effect of being one was greater on him than it was on his pupils, because he came to understand something about the nature of scientific reasoning and the scientific process, which led, of course, to his contribution to the philosophy of science, a very considerable one. Ludwig Wittgenstein, as you might expect, was a somewhat less successful teacher. He found that his patience wore very thin, very fast with his young charges, and he was hounded out of a mountain village in Austria for having knocked a child unconscious. He gave him such a hard clip across the ear for not understanding something in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus that he decided to give up teaching and therefore became a full-time philosopher instead. But the important point of this anecdote is that all three of them really believed, even if in the end they individually and personally weren't all that successful in it, that education matters. That if we really care about the future of the world, then we have to care about education. So across that whole range of questions, how do you teach? How do people learn? What should the curriculum contain? What should a school be like? What should a university be like? What should the educational day be like? Who should be educated? At what ages and why and how? Should we examine or not? All those questions, all of them, matter tremendously. And as a result, of course, there is an extraordinary babel of voices, so many different theories about these things, that those of you who have studied at a teacher's training college or got educational qualifications at university will know that this chaos, really, of views about things is one side of a story which is all too often matched by the chaos that comes out of government policy on what curriculums should be and how people should be taught and how schools should be funded. Here in Australia, I'm conscious of the fact that there was a controversy not too long ago about the teaching of history, of Australian history. And this just shows you that there is a point, a very tendentious, difficult and delicate point about what curricula should contain. So these questions are very important and burning questions. And to talk about them properly would take a very long time. So what I want to do instead is to focus on a major philosophical question about education, a question which is not altogether easy to answer unless you play intellectual pick-up sticks with it. Now, my reference is to that game where you hold a bunch of sticks and then you let them go. You've got to pick up each individual stick without moving the others. So in order to try to get a grip on what kind of answer should be given to the question, what is education for, one has to do that. One has got to be a little bit nuanced about it. Most people nowadays, consciously or otherwise, and certainly in governments around the world, if asked the question, what is education for, would almost certainly pick one of the answers that has to be given as the dominating answer. And to put it at its crudest, at its frankest, the answer that you're likely to get is this: we have to educate people so that they can become successful contributors to the economic life of the country. They have to be able to go out there and get a job and be successful, perhaps even become entrepreneurs, but anyway, to be useful, successful employees. In short, they have to become good, useful foot soldiers in the economic war. And that is why it's important that people should be numerate, why they should be literate. It's important that they should be part of a trained workforce, able to understand things like, for example, information technology, able to master the techniques and technologies of central importance to the success of the economy. Now, this is something which is part of the overt curriculum of many educational systems, but much more importantly, it's part of what's sometimes called the hidden curriculum, the assumption that lies behind what's happening. You know, when a government thinks about how it's going to invest in education, it thinks of it as an investment, and it wants a return on that investment. It wants education to be such that it's productive from the point of view of GDP. It wants that investment to really boost the growth of the economy. And this answer to the question that education is for producing people who are going to be useful to the economy is, to me, not only the least important of the answers that you could give, but is too often understood in a way that makes it the wrong answer to the question. Because the much more important answer, the better answer to the question, what is education for, is and should be that it is for life. It is for people to have successful, achieving, flourishing, worthwhile, personal lives, only part of which, of course, is going to have to relate to what they do in the way of careers or jobs. Of course, it's a wonderful thing if you love your job, if you do a job that you really enjoy, so that, like the Chinese poet who once said, "I leap from my bed and hasten swift as a thirsty cat to my work." Well, if you feel that way every morning when you get up, that's a wonderful thing, to have a really wonderful job that makes you full of satisfaction and a sense of movement towards something really worthwhile. That's great. A lot of jobs aren't quite like that. And therefore, we are reminded, if we are in such jobs anyway, that there is more to life than just work. And it's those other aspects of life, those other aspects of oneself as an individual, and in particular one's relations to other individuals and to the community around one, that should also be educated. That is to say, provided with an opportunity to be enriched and enlarged, so that one's view of the possibilities for life, one's view about other people, and one's view about the world should have very broad horizons, very fresh, clear prospects before it, so that life can be really, really worth living. And that's what an education should be for. And there are all sorts of things to say about that, because although it's a very simple point, it's a very significant point in a way, because a great deal follows from it. And one thing that immediately follows from it is that education is not just about the period between 5 and 21. Education should be for life. We should all feel that we are perpetual students, that we are always learning, always open-mouthed and open-eyed, in order to drink in as much of the world and as much of the debate that there is, the great conversation that humanity has with itself about the world, so that one can be an intelligent auditor of that conversation and a contributor to it. And if an education can make people like that, if it can help them to have that enlarged and enriched view, and if it is something which continues to enlarge and enrich throughout life, then education will do the thing that it really ought to be doing, making us grow constantly, making us constantly alert. Now, how do you achieve that kind of education? Well, that's something which I very, very firmly believe is achieved not by focusing only on those aspects of what we call education, which actually aren't education, but which are something equally important but different, and that is training. Because if you think about what happens in a school, part of the process is a process of training people in certain skills. I mean, in the skills of numeracy, for example. When I was at school, we learned our multiplication tables by rote. And in fact, that was a wonderful thing. We mastered them in a sing-song fashion very quickly and very early. It freed up a lot of brain capacity, therefore, for doing other things afterwards. Now, if I have to multiply, it just comes naturally. I don't have to get out a calculator or find that I've got too few fingers and toes to be able to do the sum. orthography, spelling, knowing how to correctly use the terms in our language. That's something else that one can be trained in. Being trained in the formulae and the equations in chemistry and in mathematics, that's also a matter of being drilled, of being shown how to do something, given a technique. And training is not quite the same thing as education. Think about the etymology of the word education. There's a very interesting false etymology that it has. Now, you were all reading Plato in the bath last night, so you will know that he had this view about the fact that we simply cannot, from the very fragmentary and degenerate examples of things in the world around us, ever come to any general truths about reality. And therefore, we must have known about reality before we were born. And what happens is that we have an immortal soul, and the immortal soul is in direct contact with the eternal and immutable truths of things. And when we are born, we forget it all. And so the process of what we call education is, in fact, just a process of being reminded of a bit of what we knew beforehand. This, as you know, was called the doctrine of anamnesis, which means the doctrine of unforgetting, of remembering little bits of what we had known in a pre-existent state. And so if you look at the word education, you see that it has a Latin etymology, and it comes from a, or ex, meaning out of, ducere, to mean to lead. We get our word duke or dux, leader, from that, to lead out or to bring out. So the idea contains in it the germs of this ancient Platonic notion that we are already equipped with all knowledge, and that we must bring out that knowledge by reminding people of it. And you will have read the dialogue by Plato, the Meno, in which he demonstrates this with a slave boy who knows no geometry, and he gets the slave boy to construct a geometrical proof just by prompting him with questions. It happens, footnote, that they are rather leading questions, in fact, but at any rate, it was meant to be an empirical demonstration. Now, this idea of leading out has remained central to the idea of education. Not that we any longer believe, except when we are ourselves teenagers, that we know everything, but that we can have drawn out of us by the process of education our capacities, our talents, our abilities. These are things that can be fostered and coached. And this is a really important aspect of the process. We train people in the basic skills of numeracy and literacy. We drill people in a knowledge of those basic equations and dates and places and the capital cities and the Norman conquest. But then, on the basis of that training, we can begin to erect the structure of education, which involves getting people to think and to be perceptive and to start to reach out towards that thing which is even more than knowledge, even greater than knowledge, and that is insight or understanding. Knowing what the knowledge is worth, knowing how to connect different bits of knowledge to other bits of knowledge, knowing how to apply knowledge, knowing which bits of knowledge tell us that there are yet more things to know. And that level, the level of insight and understanding, is what emerges during the process of a schooling, and which, of course, is the great objective of a higher education at university, which is to bring people to the point of really making sense of what it is they know and have learned. Now, in our contemporary world, this is a matter of the very, very, very first importance, because now, at the touch of a button and at the speed of light, you can find almost any information that you want on the internet. So if you want data, if you want facts, if you want dates, if you want equations, you can get it just by pressing a few buttons. And therefore, the thing that we need to use education for is not so much to download from the neck top of the teacher to the neck tops of the students in the classroom those dates and facts and equations. That was something that had to be done before information was so readily available. Now what we have to teach people to do is to be good evaluators of all that data, good critical assessors of what they read and see on the internet. Because this marvelous thing, the internet, is also a dangerous thing. It's the biggest lavatory wall in history. Everybody can scribble their graffiti on it. Many aspects on the internet are false and misleading. I don't know whether you know this, but the Wikipedia pages, many of them are under attack, sometimes dozens of times a day by people who want to change or tweak or falsify information on them. It's said that the Wikipedia page on Israel, for example, is attacked several times a second, and the information there has to be adjusted. So there's a huge amount of tendentiousness. And to be a good user of the internet is a very important thing. And you can only be a good user of it if you are good at evaluating, if you develop a good critical reflective nose for knowing how to make sense of what's being offered you in the way of data and of information. And if you wanted an illustration of this, my favorite story about how important it is to know how to handle the internet well relates to the French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy. I'm sure some of you have heard this story before. Bernard is, as I say, contemporary French philosopher, has flowing locks. Not necessary to have flowing locks to be a philosopher, but he has them. He's very distinctive for his dress style. He wears a plunging décolletage. In fact, I learned just recently that he doesn't have any buttons on his shirts. They're open down to his belly button. I asked him one day, I said, Bernard, why do you wear your shirt open to your belly button? And he answered, and I quote, because I'm hot. Anyway, Bernard recently published a book. And in this book, he quoted an unknown French thinker of the 18th century called Botul, B-O-T-U-L, only to discover when the book had been printed and was on the shelves that there is no such person. It had been made up by some joker on the internet. And this is something that Bernard would have noticed if he had further noticed that Botul's theory is botulism. Well, Bernard was asked on television how on earth he could have quoted something from the internet without checking it up. And with great Gallic flair, he said, oh, you know, what he says is good, so I quote him. Well, that might be one way out of the problem, but it's a very good illustration of the fact that you have to be very good at spotting what might not be quite the right bit of information, quite the right source, or quite the right validation for a piece of information that you get hold of when you look at the internet. And so that skill, the forensic critical skill of being really good at making an assessment of something and evaluating something, that is a matter of intellectual technique, which is a very, very important component of what it is to educate a mind, to make a mind prepared and equipped and alert and able not just to get information, to know how to get it, but how to use it and how to make sense of it. So that has to be a primary target of what we do in education today. Now, there is no question at all that the STEM subjects, as they're called, science and technology and engineering, mathematics, that those subjects are of the first importance also. It's hugely important that people in our world should have competence with information technology and should be numerate. And our world, our economies, do need engineers, they do need scientists, physicists, and IT specialists. There's no question about that either. And what I'm just about to say, therefore, doesn't in one little iota affect the fact that we should encourage people to know about these things, to be literate scientifically. I mean, that doesn't involve having to be a scientist, but to be scientifically literate is to have an intelligent grasp of those things that are happening in cosmology and in particle physics up at CERN in Geneva, in the biological sciences, which are having such a great impact on medicine, for example, in the neurosciences, which are telling us so much more about ourselves and our brains and how they function. One should have an intelligent ability to grasp these things, understand them, and be able to follow debates about them, and if necessary, when questions of science policy arise, to be informed voters about them. So I'm not in one way impugning the importance of STEM subjects. But what has happened in our world, because of the answer given to the question, what is education for, is that we have devalued the humanities. We have made them seem less important because they appear to be less of a direct contribution to the great economic battle, the process of increasing growth and the bottom line on GDP. And by the humanities, of course, I mean history and literature, philosophy, the languages, classics, those aspects of the social sciences, psychology and sociology and law and economics that bear on the same questions which are really central to the humanities. Because the central question of the humanities is, what sort of people should we be? How should we live? What should we value? What's important in life and in our societies? How can we build societies with social justice in them, where it's possible for individuals to forge for themselves lives that are really worth living, and where they can forge also that thing which is central to the very best kind of life, and that is good relationships. Now, why do I say this? Why are the humanities important? Well, let me just give you the quick answer on the three central humanities, literature and history and philosophy. Think of it this way. Imagine a society that doesn't care about these things at all. So the humanities are not taught in the schools or the universities. There are no books in the bookshops or libraries about them, no programs on television about them. What would that society be like? If it knew nothing at all about history, it would know nothing about how it came to be as it is now. It wouldn't know about the evolution of the institutions that it lives by. It would know nothing about the experience of our forebears in the human story and what they achieved and what they failed at and why, if indeed they did so. It's often been said that those who know no history have very little understanding of the present, and that's true. And also, of course, the future doesn't exist. We create it moment by moment. And the only resource that we have for trying to work out the best course into that future is by looking at our past experience. I say all this, by the way, leaving aside the other great fact, which is that history is utterly fascinating. To know something about it, to read history, to have an understanding of it is absorbing and fascinating. It's all the stories about human experience, but we can learn an enormous amount from them. And so a society that didn't care about history, that was ignorant about it, would be in a very impoverished and shallow state. So that's why our educational systems should want people to be historically sensitive, historically literate, to have a sense of context. Now, I imagine that this society doesn't care about literature either, doesn't care about the stories we tell one another about what it is to fall in love or to experience grief or to have great ambitions and to strive to realize them. If you think about it, literature is a very highly organized form of gossip, and we all love gossip. We all want to know about what other people are doing and why and what they felt and what happens behind closed doors. And this is the marvelous thing about literature. However energetic you are yourself, you can only live your own life and have direct experience of the lives of those close to you. But literature provides open windows into many, many, many different kinds of lives and experiences. It enables us to see across the great panoply of human experience and human nature. It, if we are reflective and sensitive readers, can teach us to be so much more sympathetic and generous in our understanding of other people, can help us to be tolerant, can help us to get some insight into ways of life and experience that we might never ever ourselves encounter directly. So literature is an extraordinary resource. It's an extraordinary opportunity, really, to get into the minutiae and the details, into the blood and sweat of human reality, and extending thereby our view of those things. So a society that didn't care about literature, about these stories, about the narratives that we're all so hungry for all the time, is a society which has blinded itself to an immense resource of possibility for understanding ourselves and other people. And finally, we imagine this society doesn't care about philosophy. So it never asks itself questions about the nature of knowledge, of reason, of right reasoning, of the good, of lives worth living, of value. It never questions the assumptions on which it rests. And one of the great things about philosophy is that it asks us to challenge assumptions. It asks us to dig down and unearth the assumptions on the basis of which we act and believe. I'll give you an example of this. I'm an Oxford person myself. I was a student there and I taught there for many years. And you've all heard of Oxford. Some of you may have heard of that other place on the in the damp meadows of eastern England, which I think is still called Cambridge. Now, one thing that Oxford people notice about Cambridge is that Cambridge people think that what happens in Cambridge applies to the entire universe. And my chief example of this is Isaac Newton. He was sitting in one of those damp meadows one day when an apple fell on his head. It made him look up at the sky and he saw the moon and he asked himself the question, why doesn't the moon fall to the earth? And thereby began a long and curly tale, which eventuated in the inverse square law of gravitation, which, like a good Cambridge man, he applied to the entire universe. And instead of just thinking that gravity, there's a lot of gravity in Cambridge, but why did gravity just apply to Cambridge? He applied it to the entire universe. So now, you might want to ask him, if you had the opportunity, say, Isaac, why did you generalize the law of gravity to the entire universe? What would he answer? Well, he would say, well, it's because the universe is the same everywhere. He uses this very poetic turn of phrase, the universe is homogeneous throughout its parts. So you say to him, but Isaac, why do you think that? Knowing as you know now, of course, because the other thing you were reading in the bath last night was quantum physics and cosmology. So you know that the laws of physics don't apply across the whole universe. On the event horizon of a black hole or at any singularity like the Big Bang, the laws break down. So you know Newton is wrong. So you say to him, but why did you assume that? Why did you assume the universe is the same everywhere? Well, he would say, as he does say in the Principia, the universe is the same everywhere because it was created by God, and God is an economical workman. Meaning that God would just make the universe the same everywhere, even though having eternity, you might expect a bit of variety. You know. Well, there are three great assumptions, at least three great assumptions lying behind what Newton says. First, that there is a God. Secondly, that she created the universe. And thirdly, that she's an economical work person. By the way, people do ask me why I say she, I say it's just to keep you awake. Well, so there are three great assumptions. And the really significant thing about them, because of course they're independently debatable assumptions, but the really interesting point is that they are non-physical assumptions, non-scientific. They're theological assumptions, and yet they lie in the very foundation stones of classical Newtonian physics. And that's a surprise. And that surprise is repeated again and again and again when you look at the kinds of beliefs, the thoughts, the bases, the foundations of things that we think and do in our society. So to dig up those assumptions is of the first importance. And that's why philosophy matters. So this society we're imagining, which never does that, gives us the narrowness, the lack of depth, the lack of perspective that results from not knowing what the humanities offer us. And this is why, for lives that are good, for lives that are, good in the sense of fulfilling and worthwhile, not necessarily good in the narrow moralistic sense, but lives that are really good to live, one needs to have that horizon of view that the humanities offer. And it is no surprise to me at all that one of the great institutions for the study of STEM subjects, Imperial College at London, has introduced for its students what they call the co-curriculum, which is a strand of humanities studies alongside their technical studies, in order to provide that widening of view. Now, many things that the humanities address are things that don't have easy or black and white answers. And sometimes, of course, they don't have answers at all. That's a characteristic sometimes of philosophical inquiry. But then you know what the French poet Paul Valéry said about this matter. He said, une difficulté est une lumière. A difficulty is a light. Mais une difficulté insurmontable est le soleil. An insurmountable difficulty is the sun. So when you tackle ideas that are hard, when you tackle questions that are difficult, when you look at the complexity and ambiguity of human experience that the humanities address, you learn so much about others and about oneself and about the world around us. And that is what the humanities offer. So the answer to the question, what is education for, has to be, must be, it is for life. It is for living. It is to provide us with an opportunity to think and to see, to become critical and reflective, to have that broader vision which enables us to imagine more and to see into other lives, to be more tolerant and embracing, to be more generous in our understanding of things, but also ourselves to live with the kind of imaginative courage that a human life should be premised on. Now, I love to tell this, and I close on this little anecdote now, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. But when you read your Herodotus, probably, this being a Sydney audience, in the original Greek, you will remember that he tells the story of Solon, the great lawgiver of Athens, who visited King Croesus of Lydia, the richest man by far, the richest person by far of ancient times, who loved to have his visitors taken to the treasury, there to see the great panoply of wealth that he had. And then he would ask his visitors, who, in your opinion, is the happiest person in the world? And the visitors would say, well, you, because you're so rich and you're a king. But Solon said, I knew somebody back in the suburbs in Athens there, Croesus was a bit cross. What? You choose a commoner over me? And Solon said, yes, because I don't know whether you're happy. By the way, in those old days, happiness meant something different from today. Happiness in those days meant something really, active, well-doing and well-being, what Aristotle called eudaimonia. Nowadays, of course, if we put enough Prozac in the public water supply, we'll... So we have a different conception of happiness. So that's what Solon meant. So I don't know whether you're happy, but I do know you should think about it. You should educate yourself into a consciousness of how important it is to think about it. And you know why? Because of the brevity of life. That a human life is less than 1,000 months long. 300 of them were asleep. Another 300 months were in the supermarket or waiting for a bus. So you have 300 months to live with all the vividness and passion that a human life should be full of. Now, that sounds rather dispiriting, especially when you start doing a bit of mental arithmetic and thinking, heck, I've used a few of those months up already. But here's the thing. If you are a reflective, attentive consumer of the riches that the humanities offer us, if you've had the opportunity to read literature, to know something of history, to think and discuss and debate philosophically, then you turn those 300 months into 3,000 months, into 300 years. Because time is not time, it's life, it's experience. And the more richly you experience and the more richly you live, the longer you live, the fuller your life is. It's so easy to prove this. But I can say this to audiences in England. It's a little more difficult for audiences in Sydney. But if you go to Paris for the weekend, while you're there, it feels as if you're there forever. It's wonderful. When you get home again afterwards, it feels as if it's gone like a flash. What does this tell you? It tells you that time is very, very elastic around experience. And so if your life is full of rich experience, it is hugely expanded in time. And where do you get that rich experience from? You get it from knowing stuff, from insights, from having read and thought and listened and heard and discussed. That's what makes you live all those centuries when you're living your 300 months. And by the way, guys, 300 months is 25 years. It's not too bad. Thank you very much.
This session was recorded live at the Sydney Opera House and presented by the Sydney Opera House and the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer free counselling for individuals, consulting, leadership and development services. As a non-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations to continue our work, which can be made via our website. Thank you.